Welcome to our third IPD lecture on web development with Python and Web.py. So last week we started creating this application called Reddit clone. Let's briefly review it from the user point of view. So we would have categories listed here and listed in the index page. We click on a category and we see posts posted by users, and we can sort them by date time, or we can sort them by votes. Right now the votes are all at 0. Let me post them by date time, and I can post a new one, or we can go back and we can look at the comments, and I can post a new comment about this. And so every post has its own page, view post number 2503, and this will be the comments. Says unknown because I'm not logged in here. I should log in actually to be able to post. And this is a security issue. We should not be allowed to post comments if we're not logged in, so that needs to be fixed. Let's also look at the structure of the application that we created last time. And so we have two tables, a blog post and a blog comment. Sorry, this is not the right application. Here we go. We have a table category. Categories have a name. We have a post which references a category, and a post is a title, an optional URL, a body which is text, a number of votes, and a signature, so we know who posted this post. We have a table for votes. We are not using it yet, which links a post to a score, +1 or -1, and an author, so a signature. And com would be a comment about the post, so it references a post, it is a parent, there's a number of votes, and as a body, and also a table to record individual votes. So this links a comment to a score, +1 or -1, and to a user. We also have a function author that, given the ID, if the ID is none, tells me unknown. Otherwise, it retrieves the author and gives me the first name and last name of this one author. With some logic to populate this with random data. Let's look at the controllers. We have a default controller, which basically sets a constant post per page equal 10. We have get category that, given arg0, which is a category name, it retrieves the category, and if it's not there, redirects to index with an error page. Otherwise, it returns the category object. We have an index that lists our categories. We have create post that makes a SQL form to create a new post, and on success, it redirects to view post. We have an edit post, and again, we need some rule here because we should not be able to edit everything. We should only be able to edit things we created. List post by date time. So this selects all posts by a given category, where the category ID is specified by get category, which is retrieved from the request args 0. And it also allows us to specify an optional page as request args 1. So this allows us to do pagination of the posts. This post by votes is the same, except that the sorting is different. And then we have list post by author. Again, same logic, but the condition for filtering is different. Now we are filtering all those posts created by the user, which is specified in request args 0, not by a category. And we have view post. So we retrieve the post ID, we retrieve the post from the ID, we retrieve all the comments, we sort them, and actually we want the comments sorted in reverse in chronological order, not reverse chronological order, so we need to fix this one. And actually, this gives me the most recent comment, and then we have a form to post a new comment, and the new comment as a parent, which is the latest one, or none. So this should be fixed. So if there is a latest comment about this post, the parent should be the comment ID if we have the comment, else it should be none. And then we retrieve all the comments in chronological order, which is the correct thing to do. And we have to implement a mechanism to vote and a mechanism to vote for comments. Okay, so let's take it from here and improve this. So what else do we need to do? There are certain pages that allow us to create or edit posts, so we need to set rules about those pages. We can only create if we're logged in. We can only edit if we are logged in. And we can only submit comments if we are logged in. So but we should be able to see the other comments even if we're not logged in. So only this form should be conditional. So if we have a user, so if we are logged in, then we should be allowed to see this form. Otherwise, if we don't have a user, instead of the form, we want to display a link that says something like login to comment, and this link should redirect to the login page. And perhaps there should be a variable that redirects us back to this URL with the same arguments. We want to carry them forward. Here we go. So we can now give this a try and check if this works. So if I go on programming and I try to post a new link, it redirects me to the login page. If instead look for one particular item, comments, okay, we get an error, so let's see what the problem is. So args is undefined, and that's because it's supposed to be the request args, right? So args is an argument of the URL function, and you want to set it to be the same as the current request args. So let's try that. Okay, so login to comment, it redirects me here, and I log in. By login, try again. Okay, it redirects me to the page where I was with the form to be able to post comments. Okay, so that's working fine. There are a few more things we want to do. We want to implement a mechanism for voting. Let's go back and let's do it once first. Let's do for the list page. So here we display the votes, and we want to have buttons to vote something up or something down. And well, one way to do that would be to add some buttons that communicate with the server via AJAX. So let's see how we could implement the callback, and then we implement the JavaScript which is required to do it. Okay, so how would this work? So we're gonna have a URL that looks like this. Host name, and then application, then controller, and then vote callback. And in order for us to activate this vote callback, we are going to do a post. So we're going to require that there are post variables. And here we go. So well, we need to retrieve somehow the ID and the direction. So we are assuming that we are going to have two post variables. One is the ID of the post we're voting for. I'm going to use the get notation even if this is going to be a post. So these are going to be get post variables. And for testing purposes, we can use get variables. So let's say I want to vote on 2, and I want to set a direction, which could be up or down. So let me say up. So what we need to do is we need first to retrieve the particular post, so the one with this ID. So let's get the ID from request post vars. And because I need to be able to test it, let me just say vars and put the request post vars in here. So this will make the whole syntax a little bit simpler. Okay. So the ID is vars ID, and the direction is vars direction. So first we retrieve the post, and if we find a post with this ID, what we need to do, we need to take the post votes and we need to increment them. So the proper way to do this is update record. Votes are the post votes, either +1 or -1. So let's do a thing. Let's set the direction to be +1 if direction is up, else we take it to be -1. So we add this direction. So let's read this again. We have a vote callback. We want to vote for a certain post ID, and we have a direction could be up or something else. And given the ID which we retrieve from the vars, which are the request post vars, we retrieve the post record and we update the record, and we set votes to the current value of the votes plus direction, which could be +1 or -1. And this is the simplest way to do it, but then we also need to record the vote with a signature so that the same person cannot vote twice unless it's changing the vote. So let's try and see how this works. And let's do it for get so we can test it more easily. So we're looking at this particular entry, which is number 494, and it displays 0 votes. Now, we want to call this vote callback, and we want an ID which is 494, and we want a direction which is up. Okay, so something happened. Let me reload this page, and this vote is changed to 1. So let's do it again. Let's reload this page. Now in that vote is changed to 2. Now, this callback is just returning a dictionary, which right now is displaying the dictionary back. Instead of doing that, let's return as a string the current post votes, so we know exactly what the current number of votes is. So I vote this, I get 3, I get 4, I get 5, and so on. So if I reload this one, I should get 5. Okay. So now we can connect that using AJAX, so that we can add a button here, and when we press the button, it calls the callback returns a value, the value is inserted back into the number of votes. So we need to edit this view. So we need to edit the view for list posts. And let's look a little bit how this is done. So we have a span with the class votes that contains the number of votes. So we're gonna put some buttons here, and this is all done in a table. So let's add a button first. We call it a button. Button minus, and we can have another button after. one will be a plus. Let's see how this looks like. Okay. Now the buttons plus and minus, which eventually we can render in a different way. And this comments at the next line, let's align them better. Call span equal 3, so that these comments get moved under it. Okay, so this looks a little better now with the buttons here. Now we want to be able to identify which button we are clicking, and the proper way to do that would be to give these buttons some data attributes. So we can say if we press a button, a certain data attribute perform this particular action. And also we need to know which ID this is about. So let's do it this way. Let's mark the table row with a data ID attribute which contains the post ID. And let's take this button and let's give it a data direction attribute that says up, and this other one data direction attribute that says down. Let's say D down. Let's write a script. Let's create a function do AJAX vote. It's going to take an element, the one we click on, let's call it P, and the direction. It's going to do something about it. But now it's just going to alert. Clicked. And then when the page loads, we're going to execute a function that is going to register this callback. So we're going to isolate, we're going to select those elements that have a data direction equal up. And when this is clicked, the function we're going to call is do AJAX vote. And we pass the element clicked and the direction up. And now we do the same with direction down. And let's check if this part works. So if I click on minus, clicked. If I click on plus, clicked. Now, so this function is called every time I click on one of those buttons that has either the direction up or the direction down or the direction up. And what we want to do is, when I click on this button or the other button, I want to find out what's the data ID, and then I want to submit the AJAX request. So let's find that out. Let's take the jQuery of the element we passed, so this element we clicked on. Let's get the closest TR, because the closest TR is going to be, the closest TR to this button is going to be the one that contains the data ID. And we're going to get the attribute data ID. So this is going to give it the ID we want to vote for. So we're going to store it into a variable, make it a variable. And so we clicked on this ID and this direction. Let's see how this works out. Okay, so I want to vote for 494 down, or I want to vote for 494 up, or I want to vote for minus 73 down, and so on. So now we're ready to make the AJAX request. So we make the AJAX request, and we can specify various parameters here. So first thing we specify is the method, and the method we want to use is post. Then we specify the URL, and well, what's the URL? Well, we are gonna call the URL of the vote callback, right? So use the vote callback. So we call the URL of the vote callback. Other parameters we want to pass here. One is data. So data again is a dictionary, and we're passing the ID, which we know is the ID, and we're passing the direction, which we know is the direction. So we finish with the data, and then what happens in success? Well, on success, actually, I don't need all these quotes. I can put them here. Let me make it a little simpler. Okay. So on success, we can call a function that retrieves the response data, and is gonna put it into the span, which is the closest, right? But let's just alert for now, so we see that we get a response, and then we do that. Alert data. So we close this bracket, then we close that bracket, then we close the round bracket. Okay, so let's see if this works. Okay, we vote for minus, and an error occurred, so let's see what happened here. There was an internal server error, and this is supposed to be post bars, right? So make sure everything's posted correctly. So what we can do to check that everything's posted correctly, we can add a print statement in the vote callback, so we can print these bars. We can also print the post votes here. Okay, let's try it again. Reload. 4. So it's working now. And we can see the output log. So this is the data being received by the callback, and this is the data returned by the callback. So now I have 3 votes, now I have 2 votes, I can press plus, now I have 3 votes, now I have 4 votes, and so on. Okay, so what we need to do now is start the server again. We need to edit the view again, and let's look at where the new number of votes has to be placed. So there is a span of class votes, which is into this tr. So what we can do is we can take the jQuery closest, and then we can look for the children type tr. We can set the HTML in there to the value returned by the callback. So this function now belongs in here instead of alert. Let's indent it a little bit. Okay, so we make the callback. The callback returns some data. We locate the button that we clicked, the closest tr. We looked at the child of that, which is not tr, but it's class votes. we now need to create logic to allow voters to change their vote without voting twice for the same item. So let's go to the function vote callback, and first of all, in order to record the vote, we require that we have a user. Second thing, we check if the vote table contains something for the current post from the current user. Now we have two possibilities. We have the possibility that we have this vote. We have the possibility that we have the vote, but the score is not the same as the current direction. So perhaps the voter pressed plus, so the score would be, the direction would be +1. But previously the score was -1, so previously voted negative. And then we have the other case in which the voter is trying to vote twice. Okay, so if we don't have a vote recorded, then we need to record it. This is exactly what we did before. And then we also need to insert a new vote item in the vote record where we record each individual one for this post and with a score equal to this direction. If instead the voter has changed his vote, so the direction that he's pressing now is different than the record that we already have about this user, then what we need to do is, well, we still need to update the record, but instead of inserting, we need to update this record that we have. I have to change the direction. Let's check if this is working fine. We have an error there. Let's see what it is. Score equal direction, right? Okay, so I vote plus and I have an error. Let's check what ticket we're getting. This ends in that string. Let's see what tickets we have. And here's the ticket. And vote is not defined. And yes, we need to save it, right? We retrieve it and we need to save it, so we can use the variable here and here. Try again. So I vote plus, I cannot vote again, but I can vote minus. I can vote plus, I can vote minus, I can vote plus, I can vote minus. Now let's look at something that actually is odd about this implementation. So something has a vote of 0, and I vote plus, and I add my vote. Now if I change my mind, the vote should not go back to 0. The vote should be to -1, because I changed my mind, right? So it started with 0, and then I decide to vote minus. This should go to -1. So the way it's implemented by Reddit and other similar systems, if you change your vote, you have to subtract your previous vote, which means you have to multiply this direction by 2. So let's look at it again. I vote this one. Oh. This I may have voted before already. Let's try this one. I vote this one, and then I change my vote. So this is my vote. It's either +1 or -1. It should be added to existing votes. +1 or -1. That's what it's supposed to be. Okay, so this vote callback is now done. Now we want exactly the same logic for comments. So let's look at the comments for one particular item. So this one has comments. we have two parts here. One part is this JavaScript code, which registers the AJAX callback, and the other part is let's call it the widget. So this table that we are using, this table structure that we are using to display the buttons. So I'm gonna copy this table structure, and I'm gonna add the same table structure when we do comments here. So when we view a post, we want the same table structure. So we have a loop over all the posts, and we want a table with the same structure. But here we're not talking about posts, we're talking about comment. And let's remove all the other stuff that I copied that is not really required, and then we try to make it look better. That's how this looks now. Okay, so here we have the widget with the votes, and then after that we have the actual comment. I'm gonna leave it like this in terms of presentation, and then people can change the votes. Now, this is displaying the wrong number because this is displaying the common votes, and right now the common votes are all set to random numbers because these are automatically populated, and that is fine. We will just write the code to fix it. Now, this is the JavaScript, so we copy exactly the same JavaScript here. The only changes that we need to make is that now this is no more a vote callback, but this is a com-vote callback. So we're going to call a different callback, and now the ID is the ID of the comment is no longer the ID of a post. Let's go to our default controller, and we have post, we have vote callback. So we take everything which is in here, and we're going to replicate it for com-vote callback. So everything is very much the same. And what should we change here? Well, every time we reference a post, it's actually a com. So this is a comment post. So this is actually a comment. This is actually, if we have this comment, this is not a regular vote, this is a vote for the comment. It's a com vote. And this one is a com post. And this is not a post, but this is a comment. And we update it based on the current com votes. And this is not a vote, but it's a com vote. And this is not a post, but it's a com post. And same thing here. This is a com update. And everything else should be fine. Let's take a second look at it. And this is com votes, of course. Okay, so what have we changed? Instead of using table DB post, we're using table DB com post. So everywhere that table DB post appeared, we replace it with DB com post. And instead of DB vote, we have DB com vote. And every time that appeared, we replace it with DB com vote. But the objects, the records, we called com instead of post, and we left the other one vote because we're still talking about votes. So let's see if this part works. Okay, we have an error, so let's figure out what the error is. So this is the error. And com post is wrong. Let's see what it is. It's just com, not com post, right? Let's see if this fixes it. Okay, so this is working, and this works like the one before. So we should now be able to go back to programming, and they are sorted by votes. Let's take this one about comment and vote it up. Let's take this one and vote it down, and let's put this one down. So now the comment should appear before 185 millions. Let's load this page. Yeah, I have the comment, and now we have 185 millions. Okay, so things are sorted the way they're supposed to be sorted. I can go look at the comments, and similarly, I can go and change the comments. One area of Web.py which we've not explored is the helper system. So let's get an interactive shell for the application welcome, and let's explore the helper system. So in Web.py, helpers have the same name as the corresponding HTML tag. For example, div. So this is an object which we can make an instance of using the brackets, and we can print it. When we print it, it gets serialized, and it generates the corresponding HTML tag. We can put stuff into the div, like this is a test, and the content gets serialized. The helper helps us in a number of ways. For example, let's say that the content is an expression that contains a character less than, which in HTML has a special meaning. Web.py escapes the content of the helper, so replaces the less than symbol with its corresponding escaped sequence, which is the correct thing to do when embedding this text into HTML. Now we can pass not one argument, but we can pass multiple arguments separated by a comma, and they get concatenated into a single string. Now the content can also be another helper, and it gets serialized and then embedded in place. So this helps us build HTML programmatically using an object representation of the document object model, but this is done server-side now, as opposed to be done client-side. We can also set attributes with the div. So let's say we have a div that just says hello world. We can set attributes using named arguments to the constructor of the div object. So for example, if we want to set a class, we would say class equal and the name of the class, my class. Now what's important is that classes are a sort of keyword in Python, so to avoid ambiguities, all the attributes of the helpers must be prefixed by an underscore. So we're going to use underscore class instead of class. So we see that the attributes is now there. Similarly, we can set a style, for example. Or we can set an ID. And they all get properly serialized. So we can do things like build a div that contains A and contains another div that contains B, that contains a span, that contains an A, that contains the string click me, which is an href to a URL for the current action. So this closes the A, this closes the span, this closes the div, and this closes the other thing. Again, this is an object which we can then print. Now we can do more than just printing it. We can assign it to a variable, and we can manipulate this. For example, we can take D and we can insert at position 0 another span that says test. Now we can print D again, and the span has been inserted before this A. Similarly, we can take D and we can select elements like, let's look at the elements which are span, and let's print what we get. We get a list of elements. Let's get the second one, and now we can get the second one and we can delete what it contains. So the first thing it contains. Let's print D. So I have deleted the A that was inside the span. Now I can take the same span and I can append something to it. I can append a string, or I can append another helper. Let's print D again. And now we see that the span contains a string test followed by A, which is another helper. Now notice that when we build anchors, sometimes there may be additional attributes that are set automatically by Web.py, and there are very few cases of this. Usually the anchor tab does it. The syntax of the Web.py helpers allow to use a jQuery-like syntax for selecting elements. For example, let's construct a div which contains a span that just says hello, and another span that says word, and this one has a class which is 1, and another span that says test, and this span is going to have an ID that says X. Now, given D, we can select all the elements that have that are a span, or all the elements that are a span and have a class equal to 1, or all those that have an ID equal to X, or those that have a class equal to 1 and an ID equal to X, and of course there is none of them. Instead of selecting all the elements, we can just select the first matching element, or we can just use element to select the first matching found. And if we print it, we get the span in question. And again, given one element, like let's say the one with an ID equal to X, we can select it using different syntax. So we can specify the tag and the ID, or simply the ID, or we can specify attribute equal value, so ID equal X. And this is the same as the jQuery syntax. Now, given that we have an element, we can also change some of its attributes. For example, we can change its class, and we can set its class to 2. And now we can select that element with a DX and class 2. Here we get the new element that we've created. Of course, we've changed D as well because D contains this particular element. There are other things we can do if we need to create, for example, attributes of a tag that have non-standard names. So let's say we want to create something like a div that has an attribute with a strange name like A:B equals C. Okay, let's say we want to do something like this. The way we would do it in Web.py is we create the div, we put the content. Now we cannot use the syntax A:B here because this would not be a valid named argument, but we can just pass a dictionary of attributes, and now we can use the syntax underscore A:B equal C, and now we generated the attribute that we wanted. Notice that also the values of the attributes are properly escaped. So an attribute may contain a substring like A quotes B. It may happen. So this would be properly escaped, even if the rule for escaping values of attributes is different than the rule for escaping the actual content, text content of the tag. Another recurrent problem may be that we need to generate something like a tag that is not supported by, does not correspond to one of the default helpers. So like there is no helper for header, but you could use a tag header in HTML5. So Web.py allows you to do that by saying tag.header. So tag is a generic tag generator, and you can say dot anything you want, and then you use the normal syntax like hello, and then you can set a class, and this would generate the header tag. Sometimes here the name of the tag is in a variable. You still do it. What you need to do is put the name in square brackets. So tag can be used as a dictionary, which will generate the tag that you need. There are other types of helpers which don't exactly correspond to HTML tags, but there are a lot of helpers that do correspond to HTML tags. For example, you can make an HTML document that contains a head, that contains a title, that contains a body, that contains a header, that contains a P, which contains an anchor, which contains more text, and we close the P, and we close the body, and we close the HTML. So this would generate a more complex HTML string. Some that don't correspond to tags are, for example, the URL helper. The URL helper allows us to generate the internal URL within Web.py. For example, give me the URL of a certain function, for example, index, assuming it's in the same controller that generates this URL. And what we get not the full URL, but we get the path info. Now, if we want the full URL, we would have to set the scheme. For example, we can say scheme is HTTP, and we'll get the full URL within the scheme. We can say HTTPS, or we can say true. This will just use the same scheme as the one used to call the controller that is generating this URL. Instead of passing just the name of the function, we can specify which controller. We can specify which app. Sometimes in legacy application you may find that these arguments have names, and A stands for application, C stands for controller, F stands for function. But it works the same way. So we tend not to use that very much. Also, okay, let's just look at the index function. We can pass additional arguments that follow the name of the function. For example, args equal 1. So after index, we are adding a /1. It could be a string. It could be a list of things. And then we'll follow the name of the function separated by a slash. Similarly, we can pass variables. They will be used to build a query string. Like a variable could be a equal b, x equal y, something like this. And here is building the query string. Again, everything is properly escaped. So let's say that y contains a space. And you see that the space has been replaced by a plus, which is the proper way to escape a query string. So Web.py knows all these rules, so you don't really need to worry about those. Sometimes you want to generate the current URL, so you just don't pass any argument. Now this, like we have the div helper, similarly we have the form helper. The form helper is more defaults, like it has an action attribute, an enc type, a method, but pretty much works as any other helper. We can specify a different method, for example. And we have an input helper. And typically an input helper is another default, which is the type. We can specify other types. So what we can do is we can build forms using helpers. Let me create a new form, which is form that contains an input of with a name equal X and another input of type equal submit. I can print this form and I get a representation of the form, which I could embed into a web page. Now this form object is actually a little bit more sophisticated than the other helpers, because it's not just something that can be serialized or can be searched for sub-elements, but it has certain knowledge about the input fields that it contains, and has the ability to process a Python dictionary that contains values for those inputs. So let's have an example. Let's say that I have a variable s, which is a dictionary. Now what this form can do, this form can process s. The proper way to say is accepts s. This is returning false. What does it mean? It means that we have displayed the form. Now we're trying to accept this variable, which we want to put into the form, and the form is rejecting this. Let's see why that is. Let me print this form again. Now when we call accept, the form gets modified and something new gets embedded into the form. In particular, an hidden input field with the name, in this case equal default. So let's do the following. Let's create a dictionary that contains a value for x and contains a value for this hidden field, which is called form name, which is default. Now let's accept the form again and we get true. So if we now print form vars, what we get is a storage object in which the input has been passed from this dictionary s into form vars. So this form object is a container for variables which may be passed through a post or a get request. So it has the ability to filter those variables from the get or post request and move them from the argument, in this case s, into form vars. Now at this point it seems kind of useless, but let's see a slightly more sophisticated case. So let's create a form again and let's give more rules about this form. So let's say that this form requires that this variable x is not empty. Now, what happens if I pass this particular dictionary and I ask the form to accept it? Well, I get that the form is rejected and I can ask the form why. And it's going to tell me that it was rejected because x is not empty, so I must enter a value for x. So let's insert a value for x and let's accept this new s. Now this is accepted and I can look for the form errors and I will not find any error, but I can ask for the form vars and I will find that x was accepted. Okay, so in order for a form to be accepted, you must pass a variable s which contains a dictionary, and this dictionary must contain a form name which must match the name of this form. So Web.py wants to check that the form being submitted has the same name as the form being generated, and this form name is supposed to be unique. Also, the accept function is going to look for variables in this dictionary, and they have to match the names of the input fields which are into the form, and is going to apply the validators to each field, and these validators are set into the requires attribute. So let's actually just print this input field here to see what it does. So when we print it, this requires is not an attribute. This requires is not preceded by an underscore. So the only thing Web.py does at this point is it takes this requires, this value for the validators, and stores as a member variable of the input object. So the input object knows the requirements for the input. Is the form object that when accepts a dictionary of input is going to locate all the variables and all the validators, and it's going to apply those validators. It's going to decide whether the input passes validation or does not pass validation. Now, this is the simplest way to generate forms, and you can make all kinds of forms that contain input and contain like text area, and you can make more sophisticated forms if you want to. Now there are more sophisticated objects that can generate forms and are based on this helpers, and also make use of validators, but they may have a more sophisticated syntax. For example, there is an object called SQL form. So let's say we have a database connection, and we have a table called person, and this person has a field which is name. So when we say form is an SQL form of a DB person, what we're doing, we're creating person. We're creating person here. We're creating a create form for this database table. If we manually take a person and we insert somebody's name, so this will be person number 1, we can make a SQL form which is an edit form for person number 1, and again we can print it. And again, this form can accept variables, and here we would have to pass a dictionary. And again, this could be a man-made dictionary, it could be a request vars dictionary, and so on. Most of the times we want to automate this process. We always want to accept a request post vars. If that's what we want to do, we can just say form process, which is what we've been doing so far. Now notice that even if we make a form with SQL form, this is nothing but an extension. So the SQL form is derived from the form object. We can make the same form even in absence of a table. We can say in SQL form, we can say factory, and we want one that contains a field name. And again, we can print this form, we can see how it looks like. So it's a form which is a method post and contains a table, and this form contains rows, and there is different input, but there is an input of class string, which is a name equal to name, and the value is empty, and we also see some hidden fields in there. So this SQL form has the ability to generate forms from database table, edit form from records, or can act as a factory, which can make forms just out of fields, even if there is no database table. Can do all kinds of other things, like we can make a grid out of a database table person. And what's a grid? Well, this is something that depends on the context. May generate a JavaScript and HTML to create a widget, and it's a widget that allows you to do pagination and browse through your data, edit the data, and so on. So this is a complex object. I'm just going to mention it at this point. And there's even something more complex, which is a smart grid. And there are other types of forms in there and form generators, but they more or less all follow the same structure. Now, for the basic form, there are all kinds of things you can set here. For example, you want to show, let's make a edit form. What you see is that this form is actually showing the ID of the record that we are editing. Here it is, 1. So do we want to show this ID? We can say show ID equal false. So if we don't want to show the ID, make a form without showing the ID. We now want to understand better the template language of Web.py. So let's create a new app. Let's call it app3. And in this app, we're going to edit default. And we're going to write an index function that just returns an empty dictionary. And we're going to edit the view for this index function. So we have a default view, which is quite complicated. And all we're going to do is we're going to put that HTML, and a head and title in the end that says my title, and after the head we're going to have a body, and into this body we're going to have an h1, and to this h1 we're going to have a hello world. So a view is just HTML, and when we call the function index of app3, all we do is we call the function returns a dictionary, and if you return a dictionary, Web.py locates a template and puts the template, renders the template and returns the text that corresponds to the template. Now let's edit this template again, and let's put something here like equal 1. So what does it mean? Well, anything in between double curly braces is just pure Python language, and if there is a equal prefix, it means that the Python expression, the output of the Python expression should be embedded into the page. So we can say equal 1 or equal 1 plus 1. So you can think of this 1 plus 1 as being a Python expression which gets evaluated, and we get 2 there. So we can do all kind of math expressions here. We can even import stuff. So we can, for example, import math, and we can ask it to print the math sign of 1. See what we get. Let's print the sign of 1. So this is executed server side before, after the function is called, but before Web2py returns the data to the browser. Here, Web2py sees certain global variables. For example, it sees everything which is defined in the models. An example would be the database tables. So show me my database tables. So you get a list of database tables. It also sees anything which is returned by the controller function. So if I were to return a variable a which is equal to 3, well then this variable a would be visible. So this 3 is now visible. But as I said, between curly brackets, you can put any Python code you like. For example, you can put loops for k in range 10, and then you would say print k, for example, and then you close the loop. You close the loop with pass. So normally, in the Python language, you define blocks of code using indentation, but you cannot use indentation inside Python code embedded in HTML because you want the code to be embedded based on the HTML rules, not based on the Python rules. So the rule of Web2py template languages is that a block starts after a colon and ends with pass, unless it's obvious. So we're going to see cases in which it's obvious and you don't need the pass. So let's see what this code does. So this code prints the first 10 numbers, but of course this code sees the variables. So let's say I want to print k plus a, and a is a variable which is passed from the controller to template, so the template will see it. So we have to all those numbers. So we can do for, we can also do if, for example. So let's just print only the even numbers up to 100. So how do we do all the even numbers? Well, okay, we could just loop and multiply by 2, but let's use if statement. So if k mod 2 is 0, then we get an even number, and we print k, and then we pass. So the first pass closes the if, the second pass closes the for. Oh, we have an error of some kind, so let's see what the error is. We have a socket timeout. So when do we have a socket timeout? Usually it's when it fails parsing something. And it fails parsing because there is a bracket missing here. So we can now try again, and this works as expected. It's printing all the even numbers. We can have an else statement. And in that state, we just print dots. So notice that we have an if statement which starts a block, and we have an else without a pass, but clearly this else is matching the if, so the pass would not be necessary. So the else closes this block. And here we start another block, which is then closed by pass. So let's try this piece of code, and this works. Now another thing which is interesting is that a lot of these brackets are not really necessary. I could have just done something like this. Well, I need this one because the columns here, there, the dots there, are part of HTML. They are not part of the code. So the code starts here, ends here, but this part is equivalent to a print statement. So if we are within that else block, we want to print the dots. So let's try this out. Okay, so this works as expected. What if I actually wanted to put this into code using Python syntax? Well, we could do that. We just have to say response write and write these dots. Would have done that. Okay. Notice that in this case there is no extra space. In this case, the extra spaces here are not relevant, but we are free to indent things better if we want using the Python rules for indentation. Just they will not be enforced, but we can do it. So here we close the pass, and here we close the other pass. So what's important is that pass is still necessary. We cannot avoid pass when we're into templates. And this equal could be replaced by a response write. We can also define functions in templates. So let's put this back as it was, a syntax that I prefer to use. Let's just print k and pass. And let's define a function here using the normal Python syntax, f of x. And let's have this function return x squared. Okay, so instead of printing k, we print f of k. So this is going to print the squares of the first 100 numbers. And that's easy and intuitive. Now, instead of printing the output of the function f, which is the value returned, we can actually have the function f display HTML in the body of the function and return that HTML as opposed to the return value of the function itself. So let me explain this in a second. So I'm going to call the function f of k, and if I run it, it's not going to show anything because I'm not putting equal. So this function is executed, it returns x squared, and so on. Now let me just return. And let me break this function this way. So anything that I put in here corresponds to a response write of that text into HTML. So let me just put in some HTML in here, like a span that says x. So if I were to run this, it's going to print 100 x's. So why does it happen? This loops 100 times. This calls f of k, and f of k doesn't matter what it returns, but it contains a span. Now, this span could be could use the variable x, could use the global variables as well as local variables, as well as arguments of this function. So I could print x in here. So let me do that. But I can use the variable in the tag itself. For example, I can say style font size, and I can set font size to be equal x pixels. So let's see what happens if I do this, and here we get numbers from 1 pixel up to 99 pixels wide. So there are cool things you can do when you're allowed to define functions that actually contain HTML, and this is kind of a unique feature of Web.py. Now, as we see in this example, what our application has a head and a body, but often we have a fixed structure, like the body may contain a div which is a class like header, and may have another div at the end which is a class which could be footer, and then in between may have a div with a class equal content. Most pages have a structure that looks like this, and our h1 would somehow be in there. Okay, let's just print k. Okay, so we may have an application where many pages have the same repeated HTML structure, and the only thing we really want to make page dependent is this part. So how would we do that? Well, what we would do, we take everything which is general and needs to be shared by many template pages, and we would create a layout file for this. So let's go back and create such layout file, and we can give it any name we want. So I'm going to create it, and I'm going to call it my layout HTML. And so here we go, my layout. I'm going to edit it, and into my layout I'm going to put exactly the content of that page, but I want to make this part of the page dependent on other templates. So other templates will only change what goes in here. So I just call this include. So what I'm saying is that some pages will extend this one, so they will have the same structure and their content will replace this include statement. So let's go and edit index again. So now I don't need all this stuff. I only need the part that goes into include, and I need to specify that this extends my layout.html. And I don't need all these spaces here. Well, I can put them in, or it doesn't really matter. There we go. I can reload it. Oh, we have an error. And my layout HTML, did I misspell something here? Of course, it's extend, not extends, and I should know better, right? Okay. Pages can also include something other than the page that gets extended. For example, here I could include another page called footer HTML. So now I would have to create this footer. So I would have to go back here and create a footer. And footer, again, could be just HTML, and could have a span that says copyrighted by me. So let's look at this again. We have my layout, which includes the template that is going to extend this one, but also as a footer that includes another HTML template, which is called footer HTML, and includes a span, which is copyrighted by me. So if I go back to the default controller here, and I call this index action, I get the footer copyrighted by me. Now, often we need some standard features of Web.py. For example, let's say we have we go into this controller, and let's say we have a flash message here. Hello world. And so because it's in response flash, and response is a global variable, this response flash is visible. So what we can do is we can edit the view for index, Actually, we can edit the layout, which would be even better. Let's edit my layout. And in the head, actually in the body, we can do this in the body, we can say something. If there is a response flash, display the response flash and pass. And we can do something else. We can put this into a div of class that we call flash, and we put the content inside the div. Here we go. So let's now call this index. And so we see the flash message hello world doesn't quite look like a flash message, does it? Well, it's just a div of class flash, but there is nothing special about the message, there is nothing special about this class. Now, like we included the footer before, we can actually include something else here. We can include something called Web.py AJAX. Now the name is a little misleading, but I'm going to show you in a second what it does. And so we can reload this page now, and now we see that hello world, the flash message, first of all, it has flashed, it has appeared. Then there's a cross that allows me to click and cancel, which is an effect that we normally have in many Web.py applications. So how does this work? This is kind of magic. Now let's look at the source of this page. And what we see is that after the title, my title, the include Web.py AJAX has been replaced by some code, which includes a script. And this code defines some Web.py specific variables, in particular the format for representation of dates and confirmation messages when people try to delete objects, so just global variables, and defines the meta keywords description generator. So it takes the content from response meta keywords, response meta description, response meta generator. It takes it from those variables and displays it in the head. And also it includes from app3 the static folder JS jQuery.js. It includes the style for the calendar. It includes the JavaScript for the calendar. This is for the pop-up calendar when you have a date widget in a form, and also includes Web.py JS. And so this includes basically jQuery and Web.py JS, which defines effects and other JavaScript functions which are useful for the operation of Web.py. So you can make your own layout, but this is something that should be in your layout. Another thing that should be in your layout is the flash message, because you want to display the flash messages. There are other things you may want in your layout, but are kind of optional, like you may want to make your own menu, or you may want to use the menu helper. So what's the menu helper? The menu helper is something that, given a response menu, which is nothing but a variable that contains a list of items, will display this response menu in the form of an unordered list of list items, and they may be nested. So let's look at that. So in this case, it will generate this kind of menu. Now let's go and look at the default layout that instead comes with Web.py. So this is a layout that we are making, but I could have edited the view of index, and instead of editing my layout, I could have used the default layout. So the default layout is in a layout file. So let's go through this layout file. So the first thing it does, it declares the doc type to be HTML, and then contains a lot of conditional headers for different versions of the Internet Explorer browser. This is just to deal with legacy cases. Then we have the head, then we have a title, and in here we basically display the response title if we have it, otherwise the request application. Then we have other comments in here. Then we set the meta, application name, and Google site verification. This is useful if you want to use certain Google services. And then we set the viewport so that this works with devices that have a small screen and can handle the orientation and the scaling. We set the icon, so we say that if we want to display an icon for this URL, the icon is located in the static file images 5icon. If we have an Apple touch device, use this other icon, which is a PNG, and so on. This is just a boilerplate code. If we have an old legacy browser, you should include the JavaScript for the modernized library, which will make the all the browsers support some HTML5 elements. Then we declare a list of style sheets that we want to include. So how do we do that? We have this variable response files, which is just a list, and we insert into this list all the CSS files that ship Web2py that we want to include. And then when we say include Web2py AJAX, Web2py AJAX HTML will generate the code to include all those CSS. So the link, href, equal, and so on. But then we have some conditional code that basically defines some other global JavaScript variables that are used to configure various parameters, like do we want a left sidebar, true or false? Do we want a right sidebar, true or false? And then we have the end of the head, and we have the start of the body. And what we have here is we have the nav bar, and what you see in the nav bar is that first we declare a local variable called isMobile, which detects if the user agent of the client is a mobile client. And then if we have a variable called response menu, display that menu, use this class, which is compatible with Twitter's Bootstrap, close this conditional, so if we have a menu, display the menu. And also, if there is an auth object in the set of global variables, so if you're using auth, build the auth nav bar and insert it in this place. So all the HTML is basically dictated by Twitter Bootstrap. There's not much flexibility there. Then we have a class container, which includes the big header under the menu, and in there, in h1, we display the response title, which again is a variable set by the user that contains the application title, and optionally we display a subtitle or nothing. And then we have a section that we call main, and again, class row is a class of Twitter Bootstrap. And if the variable left sidebar is enabled, we have a div that contains the left sidebar, we have a div for the right sidebar, and in between we have a div for the middle column, which includes whichever view extends this one. And then at the bottom we have a footer, nothing new here. And we have lots of other JavaScript which is included at the end. The Bootstrap JavaScript, the Web.py Bootstrap JavaScript, so it makes additional Web.py features compatible and work well together with Bootstrap. We have Google Analytics, which is why in first place we needed to set the Google verification, site verification sometimes is required. And then we include the share.js widget. So some of the JavaScript is done at the beginning because it's going to be required for the generation of the page. Some is included at the end because it's mostly effects that can be downloaded later in order to speed up the loading of the page. So now that we have replaced the layout of this page, we can reload it, and this is how it looks like. So we have the menu here, we have the title, we have the content, and we have the footer, and we have all these effects that we've loaded with JavaScript. And we have the nav bar, and we have everything. So all those pieces that we are using here, and let's see again what they are. We have include Web.py AJAX, and the ability to tell Web.py AJAX to include additional CSS style sheets of JavaScript. We just have to response files insert or response files append new URLs that we need. And then we insert the auth navbar, and then we insert the menu, and then we insert, where is the flash? There must be a flash somewhere. And then we insert the flash, which is the same way we've done it before, and then we include the extending view, and that's pretty much it. Okay, this is what has to be in every layout, at least should be in every layout, but you can put it in different places and you can customize the layout any way you like. So some of the variables are defined in the menu file. Here we go. So we have used variables like response logo, response title, response subtitle, response meta author, description, keyword generator. So this is where these variables are defined, and they are then used into the layout HTML. But this isn't really a convention. This is not really required that you have variables with these particular names. We just use a convention so people can create different layouts and can share, and they don't need to go and change the model, in this case the menu PY model. They can come here and change the values of this variable, but they don't need to redefine new variables and study different layouts. Here's where the menu is defined. So the menu is just a list of items. Every item is a tuple, and there's a text that is displaying the menu item. We mark it up with T because probably want it translated. This could be a boolean true or false, which the menu helper will take advantage of and render in different colors. And then the URL that is linked by clicking on this menu item. And there is an optional submenu, which is itself a list, and there's the same syntax as a menu. Everything that follows here is kind of optional. Displays the default menu. You can remove it, like talking about this default menu. So you can easily remove it by removing everything that follows. It's just a convenience for development, is not really required here. And that's the end of the file. So if we remove it, we reload it, and that part is gone. And now you can make your own menu, and you can add multiple items, and they will appear here. So the menu helper will generate them. This is done by the navbar. Another feature of the template language is the use of blocks. So let's look at layout HTML. So layout HTML uses this syntax of blocks here. So there's a block called head, which is empty. There is a block called the left sidebar, which contains some HTML. There is another block called right sidebar. There are other blocks like block center. Right now these blocks are not really used, but let me show you an example of a block. So first of all, what we can do is we can change the variable left sidebar enabled to true. If we set it to true, then in main, if left sidebar enable is true, then this div will be rendered including that block. So let's see what happens if we do that. So let's go to index HTML, and before we extend the layout, we say that left sidebar enable is true, and then we extend the layout. So if I reload this page, we now suddenly have a left sidebar. So we have enabled this particular block. So the block itself does not correspond to HTML. So we can look at this. We can look at the source of this page. And we actually reload the source of this page. And we can see that we now have a left sidebar. And we see that the block does not appear in the generated HTML. The block is just a way to name a piece of HTML code so that an extending view can then replace it with something else. So right now it just says left sidebar because this says left sidebar. So one particular HTML template may want to override the value of that block. So anywhere it would just say block left sidebar, and end the block, and it would replace the content with whatever we want. So let's replace it with blah repeated 100 times. So if I now reload this, that sidebar has been replaced with blah repeated 100 times. And I did not need to go change the layout that I'm extended, because now my extending, where do you go? My extending view declares that it's going to use a left sidebar, declares that it's going to extend layout HTML, which knows how to make sense of this variable left sidebar, and anything outside of a block is going to replace the include statement. Everything enclosed into a block is going to replace the content of the block with the same name in the layout that we are extending. So you can replace this, any view can replace any block from the layout that is being extended by the view. So we're going to build another application as example, and we're going to build an application to create surveys and have our friends take the survey. Call it surveys. So first thing we need is a model. So let's define tables where we're going to store our surveys. So a user will have to come to the system, register, log in, and can create one or more surveys. So the surveys will be associated to the author, and the author of the survey will fill the possible choices and will be assigned a unique URL. This URL will be emailed to the survey takers, and the author of the survey will be able to check the results at a later time. So first thing we need is to define a table, survey, and a survey is going to have a field name, which we're going to require that is not empty, and is going to have a field choices, which we're going to make a list of strings, and we're going to have a field of results, which is going to be a list of integers. And what else do we need into a survey? Well, this survey is going to have a unique URL that people can click on and take the survey, and we want this URL to contain a unique identifier which is random and cannot easily be guessed. So we will have to somehow generate it, but we need to store it. So I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to call it UUID, and this is just a string. And I'm going to make it writable equal false because it should not appear in forms, should be automatically generated. A survey also has an author, so I'm going to have author's auth signature. For now, we are going to have just one table, and we can do a lot with just one table. We will need additional tables to allow people to take the survey and record their individual votes, or record the fact that they have voted for the survey, so that they will not be allowed to vote twice. So let's see how we can achieve that. Now let's check that this part is working fine. So we go back here and we take database administration, and we've done some error already. So a non-field type, list strings, and it's list string. And fine, our table is being created. Now we go to default PY, and let's move all these comments that we don't need. Let's remove this doc string. Let's have a very simple index, and let's have a create survey. So this action create survey will display a form that allows me to create a DB survey, and we return locals. So this will already make the form that we need. to create the survey. And notice that right now we don't have a UUID assigned. We don't want to show this at all. So we're going to make this also readable, equal false. So now that disappears. And look how we, when we set choices, we can set various choices for our survey. Okay, so results should not be shown here because the person who created, the author of the survey should not set the results. So this should be done somehow automatically. So this is also readable and writable false. Well, this survey should have some kind of description, right? Which is some extended text, which are also going to require. Okay, so the survey is a name, is a description, is options. What favorite color? What is your favorite color? And options could be 1, 2, 3. And this will generate the survey. Let's go back to the controller and let's set some of the defaults. So the DB survey UUID should default to a randomly generated string. So from glue util, we're going to import a function called Web.py UUID that does exactly this. Generates a random UUID. Let's make sure that's working. So that's working. Another thing we need is we need to make sure that when a survey is created and there are options in the survey, the number of results is a list of strings that contains as many zeros as the numbers of choices. So how can we do that? Well, what we need is we need to inject some kind of callback here that when the form is processed, because the survey is being created, this other record is populated. So how do we do that? Well, there is a function, a callback we can register, which is called onValidation. And on validation, we call another function, let's call it f. So we need to make this function f. So we need to make a function f that takes the form and does some processing. So what's the processing it needs to do? Basically, it needs to determine the length of the request choices, request vars choices, and it needs to set the form variable results to be a list of zeros as long as the number of choices. That's all we need to do. We could actually do this even without defining a function. We could just do this with a lambda, but I think it's cleaner if we just have a function here. Okay, so let's see if this part now works. Final thing, if we create a form, we need to process the form. And after we process the form, if the form is accepted, we need to redirect the user to some other URL that we're going to create. And this is going to be an URL for take the survey. And we're going to pass some arguments. So the argument that is reasonable to pass is the value of the form variable UUID, which we just set here. We can actually make it even short. We just call it UUID here, and we just put the UUID here. The onValidation is an attribute of the process. Red, blue, and green. There we go. We have the 3 results at 0 and the choices at 3, which is what we want in the first place. Okay, so now we get to this form which displays the options to take the survey, and what we do is let's create a view for take survey. Take survey HTML, and okay, so we extend the layout HTML, and we display the survey name, and then we have a paragraph in which display the survey description, and then we display the options for choice in survey choices. We display the choice, which is just text, and let's put this into an ordered list, and each choice is going to be a list item. So this looks like now. Okay, so somehow now we have to click and vote on one of these options. So what we can do is we can put this into a form, and we can make a self-submitting form, and we can put the option somewhat in here. We can give a name to this, and the name could be the choice number. So loop over the choices, count them, and have a value for these options, which is the number of the option. And have a name which is choice. And let's make a type for this input, which is a radio button. So you have to choose one. So let's read this again. So we're making a form. The form contains an ordered list of items, and each item contains an input which is a type radio. So we have to choose one of them with the same name. The name is choice, and each one is a different value. So the value is k. And what's k? Well, when we loop over the survey choices, we enumerate them. So k will be choice number 0, choice number 1, choice number 2, and so on. So let's see how this looks like. Okay, so now we have this button, so we can make a choice. And we also need the input button of type submit, so we can submit our choice. And perhaps this choice of an ordered list was not optimal. Perhaps it would be better to have a div, and we can make the div of a nice class like well, and we don't need this list item anymore. Let's see how this looks like. We can remove the loop outside, so each option has its own div. Let's see how this looks like. I think I like this better, so I can choose one of these options here. And perhaps there should be a space. Okay, so now we have the option, choose a color, and we have the option. So what should happen when I submit one? Right now nothing happens. So what should happen is that the submission should be detected, and it should redirect me to a thank you page. So we go to default, and now we got the survey. We detect if there are form vars. Well, actually we want the survey to be submitted, so let's look at take survey and let's make a method which is post, and let's make an action which is pound, which means we are self-submitting. And so we take survey. If there are post vars, so if the survey has been submitted, what we do is we take the survey choices, we take the results, and we have to increment the one that we voting for. We increment the 1. So from the form post vars, we get the value of our choice because we call the choice, and we convert it to an integer, and we call it k. And now we take the results k and we increase it to 1. So now we can take the survey and we can update the record so that the results are the current survey results. And so we've done this part, and now we can redirect to the URL of some thank you page. And def thank you, and this page would just say thank you. So let's see how this works. So I vote for red, submit. I get redirected to, well, actually I don't, I get an error, and there's no form post vars here, right? We don't have a form here, it's the request post vars. So we reload it, we try again, and again this form. Try again. Okay, we get redirected to the thank you page. We actually not created a view for the thank you page, so we should do that as well. But we can do it later. It's kind of an optional thing to do. Now what we want is we want the ability to see results. So it's going to work the same way. It's going to get the survey, it's going to return it. And we want a way to show the results. So we need a view for see results. And we're going to make a view that works very much like the take survey. So I'm going to copy this part. So we're going to make a view for see results. And here we go. And this view, we're going to make it exactly the same like take survey, in the sense that it's going to display the survey name, it's going to display the survey description, but now it should not display a form and should not display the radio button, but instead it should display into some kind of span. It should display the results for the survey corresponding to choice number K. And you know, we can make this a certain class, a certain style or class. We can make it of a class button. Let's see how this looks like. So see results. Okay, instead of take survey, we go to see the results. Okay, and we got the results. So one person voted for this option, one for this one. This is not a real button, they don't trigger anything. There should not be a submit button at the end, which we're not using. Okay, so what else do we need here? Well, we need a way for us as managers to see all the surveys we've created. So what we can do is we can use the index page for this purpose, and we can use SQL form grid to display all the surveys we've created. So we do this only if there is a current user, and at this point we don't want to make them editable or writable, so we make editable equal false, create equal false, and by the way false is capital F, deletable equal false. So we call this a grid, and we return the local variables, which is the grid. And in the index view, we can remove all the junk which is in here, and the only thing we need to display is the grid. Okay, so let's go to the index page, and he lists all the surveys I created, but perhaps I should be able to delete them, right? So let's leave the option to delete survey. Here. We don't want to show the description and the choices, but we just want to display the name, and not even the ID, we just want to display the name. Well, we can leave the ID, sometimes it's useful. So what we can do is we can say the DB survey description readable equal false, and also the choices are false. So those columns are now gone. Something else we can do is we can say DB survey name should be rendered. So we actually say represent, and here we pass a function that takes two variables, the value of a name and the record, and give me a representation for this name. And what we want to do here is want to show the name into an anchor tab, and this is an href to the URL to take the survey that we've created and passes as argument the row UUID. Okay, so let's see if this works. Okay, so now these are links. So if I want to vote for this option, I click and I get redirected to this voting page. We also want additional buttons that show, for example, the option to look at the results. So how can we do that? Well, the grid is customizable in many ways. So one thing we can do is links, and we can have a list of links. So a list of links has the form of a lambda function that takes a row and returns a link. So let's see how this works out. So right now the links is here, but it's empty. So let's just put something like click, and let's see how it looks like. So now we have this link to say click. Let's give it a class. Let's make them buttons. And now we make the buttons. So we want this to say results. And they should link the URL to see results for the row UUID. Okay, and actually, instead of making the name clickable, it would make sense just to have two different buttons, one to see the results, one to take. So you just need to make two links. One to take, which takes survey, and want to see the result. And we actually don't need this name represent anymore. You know, I'm gonna leave it commented so you know that. I'm gonna comment so you know you can put it back if you like. Yeah. Okay, so now we look at each one of these, and we can take it, or we can see the results, and we can view the details. And actually, this view button is called detail, and we can make it false so it doesn't show, because we don't really need it. What instead we need is the ability to delete a survey. So let's make it deletable equal true. So we now have the ability to delete survey. Well, it actually is not allowing me to delete the survey because I'm not logged in, and I've created them without being logged in, so they don't have a proper signature. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to see where I am. Okay, I'm going to remove the applications, surveys, database, and remove everything from there. So this is now empty. I'm going to register. And now oh, I don't want this button. This is not the place to create surveys. Could I leave it here? Actually, could I leave it here? I could have used this one. If I were to use this one, I didn't need this create survey function at all. So let me comment this survey function at all, because the grid provides us already a way to create survey, which is good enough. Well, is it good enough? Let's see. Well, this part is missing. You see, this part that allows me to set the number of results to be the same as the number of choices. So actually, I want my own custom create survey, which means I need to disable the ability to create survey. Okay, I need to disable that button, and I need to make my own button there. So let's edit that. Let's edit the index view, and let's add the button here, which says create survey, new survey, which links the URL of create survey, and as a class, which is a button, let's make the button primary. Makes a different color. Okay, so let's see what we get now. Okay, so now we have this button to create a new survey. We create a new survey, and again we do colors. Choose a color, and red, green, blue, and submit. And here we have the options. So we vote for an option, we vote for green, and we get to the thank you page. We don't have a way to go back to index except going home, and we see the survey. We can take it again. Let's do for red. Thank you page. Back to home. Let's look at results. One red, one green. So let's customize the menu a little bit. So probably the logo, we don't want to say Web.py, we want to say surveys. And you can customize the author, description, keywords, and so on. Home would be my surveys. And this development menu, I don't want it anymore. You never want this. This is just for development purpose. Okay, so we make this part. So just can go to my surveys. And we can now make a few things just a little nicer, like all this stuff should be displayed only if there is an auth user. Otherwise, it shouldn't be. And perhaps there should be some context. Welcome to this survey app. Login or register to create a survey. So let's see how it works if I log out. Okay, surveys, welcome to the survey app, and so on. So I now log in. And now I can see my surveys. And again, I can take and so on. What else can we make better? Well, in order to create a survey, I must be logged in. And now the question is, in order to see the results, I must be logged in. But is this sufficient? Well, this is quite not sufficient because we can only see the results if we're the person who created the survey. It's not obvious to me we want to make them public. It's not obvious we want to make everybody, the survey visible to everybody. So what we can do is we can say if survey created by not equal the current user ID, then redirect to the URL of index. And before you do that, do a session flash message that says user not authorized. Okay, so now I can go to the results page and I can see the results because I am authorized. But let me log out and go back to this page, and now it would say that I need to be logged in to see that. And if I were to log in as a different user, for example, I'm going to register as a different username, you would say not authorized because that's not the survey I've created. It doesn't show that survey to me. But if I log out and log in again with the first account I've created, then I can go and I can see the results. This page automatically allows me to export the data, allows me to do pagination, and allows me to search surveys by title and other more complex conditions. In this case, there's only displaying one field. So, but I could make it searchable by other conditions. Now the question is, take survey. Should there be some restrictions so that people cannot take survey twice? There are many ways we can implement that. The easiest way is to require that people must be logged in to take the survey. So how do we implement that? Perhaps we can make that conditional. We can make it so that in the model there is a Boolean field that says if this requires login. We make this a Boolean and we default it to true. And now in the controller, when people come here and take the survey, what we can do is we can say if the survey requires login and not auth user. So if we don't have a user, then what we can do is we can redirect the user to the URL of the user action, the one that implements the login, logout, register profile. We can redirect there for login, and after login we send the user back to the current page with the same arguments. And This is not quite the end of it, but let's do this part. So let's create a new survey. Scientists, favorite scientist, Einstein, Feynman, I don't know, Darwin. And let's require login now. Okay, so now I can access this page because I'm logged in. Let me use a different browser. Let me access that page. And okay, I get an error. Let's figure out what the error is. It's actually easier if I cut and paste the error in this browser because I'm already logged in here. This is the error. Which page you give me the error? Next is unexpected keyword URL. Yes, my mistake. What we want to do is we want to redirect to this URL, and this is a variable that we want to pass along. So we put this into a dictionary of variables that we're passing, even if it's just one. So let's try this again. Let's reload it. Okay, so now it sends me to log in, and that's me if I want to log in to actually take this survey. If I do it here, I don't need to do it because I'm already logged in. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, assuming, let's break this in two parts. It requires login, and if I'm not logged in, then fine. Now I need to check if I have voted already. So I need an additional table to register votes. Now I want to make this anonymous so that I don't actually record the votes of the individual voters. I just record if they voted or not. So this must have a field with references a survey. And must have a signature. So this basically links the fact that I, as a user, have voted for a given survey. Perhaps when I voted would be useful, but that's already in the signature. Created on, created by, so I don't need to do anything for that. So let's go to create default, and if somebody tries to vote and is not logged in, well, first of all, if it requires login, if it's not logged in, redirect to the login page. Otherwise, what do we do? Well, let's check if there is a DB vote record for this survey and created by this user. If there is such item, again, redirect to the index page, well, redirect to the thank you page, and also set a message. You voted already. If instead this user is allowed to vote, what we need to do is we need to insert a new vote entry. For the survey is this survey ID. We actually don't need to set it created by because that's done automatically. Okay, so let's give it a try here. Am I allowed to vote here? Yes, I've not voted. Let me vote for Darwin here. Submit. Thank you. Go to surveys. Let me try to take this again. And thank you, you voted already. So this is more or less the end of our application. So we can make it slightly better by creating a view for the thank you page and we can make it slightly better to create a few additional views, but I leave it to you as an example to improve it. So let's see, what have we done here? What do we have? Let's summarize what we have. Well, we have a menu, which is really very simple, just one entry that links the index page. We do have a DB, our own DB1py. So we have a table survey with a name, a description, choices, and parameter that tells me if to take this survey users must be logged in or not. A list of results, which is a list of integers. One entry in this list should correspond to one entry in the list of choices, and each survey is a UUID that we're going to use to identify the survey as opposed to the survey ID, because the survey ID one can guess, and we don't want people to be able to guess the numbers to vote for other people's surveys. We want to identify the survey by a long random UUID. A survey is a signatures because we want to know who created the survey, when this survey was created, perhaps when the survey was modified, even if we did not allow modification. We have a table vote where we link a survey to a user, and we create a record every time a user votes for a survey. Let's look at default PY. So the core part is this create survey, which requires login. You must log in to create the survey. And the survey UUID defaults to a random string called UUID created by this function web2py UUID. That's what that function does, gives you a random string. And then we have a form to create a survey, which we process. And after we process it, we call this function on validation equal f. So it calls this function f, which takes a form and makes sure that the form variable results is a bunch of zeros and a list as long as the number of request variable choices. If the form is accepted, we redirect to take the survey. So the take survey part retrieves the UUID from the URL and retrieves the survey. Now, one catch here. What if the UUID is invalid, the survey does not exist? Well, or redirect to the URL of index because the user is trying to access a page that does not exist. So if the survey requires the login, and if we don't have a user, redirect to the user login and set a variable which is called next. By convention, the user login, after login, we redirect to this variable. And this variable is set to the current URL, so to take the survey, same argument, so the same UUID. But we could have specified the same UUID here, and we would do the same. Now, if the user makes it here, the user is logged in, and the survey requires login, in which case we retrieve the vote. And we record that this user has voted for, we check if this user has voted for this survey. If the user has already voted, we flash a message, you voted already, and we redirect to the thank you page. Otherwise, if there are post variables, the user is actually submitting an option for this survey, but we figure out which option, we look the survey result, which is this list of zeros, and we take option number K, we increase the 1, and we update the record with the new results. And well, if the survey requires login, we also record that this particular user has voted. Otherwise, we should not do that because it's kind of pointless. After the user has voted, we redirect to the thank you page and we return locals. So if this page is displayed the first time, it actually displays the local variables, which include the survey with the buttons. And if that form is submitted, then this page does not return anything but redirects. We have a page to see the results, which is the same two first lines, it retrieves the survey, and same thing, we want to redirect to index if the survey does not exist. And if the survey exists and has not been created by the current user, well, the user is not authorized, we'll flash the user, we redirect to the index page. We have a thank you page that just says thank you. And finally, we have an index page where we have some new API here. So basically, we create a grid for the survey. We filter surveys created by the current user ID, and we set the survey description readable to false, choices readable to false, so they will not appear in this grid. This grid will not allow to create new records, will not allow to edit existing records, we will allow to delete existing surveys, and will not allow to look at details because um, you can look at them by looking at the responses, the results. But for every row in the grid, we're going to add two links. One will say take, and we'll link the page take survey for this row UUID. The other link will say results, and we'll link see results for the row UUID. And both these buttons are gonna have the Twitter Bootstrap class button. And this is pretty much it. It's a simple application, and it's functional, and that's what it's supposed to do.